welcome to Newchip's online demo week. My name is Armando Vera Carvajal, and I'm the Accelerator Director here at Newchip. We're so pleased that you are tuned into this week-long online event that welcomes hundreds of Newchip startups alongside thousands of investors and entrepreneurs from around the world. Today, we are joined by a very special guest for a unique talk on the subjects of perseverance, courage, and taking those big risks in life that will ultimately make a very big difference. It's my sincere pleasure to welcome Morgan Schild, an American freestyle mogul skier who competed for the U.S. Olympic team at the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, South Korea. Morgan, thank you so much for joining us today here in this talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to do this and be a part of this. So thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure to, I know you're incredibly busy. You just got out of a training camp for the past week or so, and you're just all over the place. So we're so honored to have you here. Before we jump right into the conversation, I'd love to share some details about your background with our global audience to provide a little bit of context. So Morgan is an Olympian from Pittsford, New York, and she found her unlikely passion for skiing at a small hill in upstate New York at the age of 5. Though she never completed a FIS World Cup season from start to finish, Morgan is one of the most successful skiers on the freestyle team. She began her elite career at 16 years of age on the national team, leaving high school behind to chase her dreams. At 17, Morgan won her first World Cup, completing the hardest trick in the women's field in Japan in 2015, as well as being named FIS Rookie of the Year. Wow. Her short-lived victory quickly fell to a season-ending knee injury 2 weeks later. In her career, she's captured 2 World Cup wins, 5 podiums, and 1 national champion title, but it has not been an easy journey, and you'll learn why in this conversation. Morgan's career has 3 separate ACL reconstructions, shoulder dislocations, and 5 surgeries. She's the longest standing female on the team at this time, which makes her a veteran at 23 years old. Her goal is to return to the next Olympic Games and redeem herself from a heartbreak finish in 2018. Wow, gets me so pumped and excited to just, learn so much about you in such a brief paragraph, Morgan. But once again, thank you so much for joining us here. To start the conversation, you're an elite athlete. You're part of the U.S. Olympic team. To reach this place in the world of sports, let alone life, demands just so much of one. I imagine it demands absolutely everything. Taking a brief walk down memory lane, tell us about what led you to become an athlete and why you chose the path of professional sports.
That's a good question. I don't really get to think about that a lot, but I was one of those kids growing up that always had to be doing something. And I think my parents saw that. My dad was a triathlete, and he competed in the Ironman circuit for almost 30 years. I got to see him go to the World Championship in Hawaii twice. So having him as a role model, I was able to kind of picture what it would be like to be a professional athlete and do something along those lines. But again, at a young age, all I wanted to do is play sports and compete and race. And my parents took me to, I want to say 30 different sports, throughout my childhood. We tried them all out, from whitewater rafting to rock climbing to rugby. Whatever my mom could find, I was going to be enrolled in, and I was going to try it out. And skiing was that one sport that came into my life, and I knew I couldn't live without it. I just felt like a new person. Even at 9, 10 years old, I was like, that's what I want to do. That is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I never knew it could be a career, though. I thought it was just going to be a really fun passion and something I was going to be able to compete with my friends with as a hobby. And quickly I learned that I really wanted to do it as a lifelong adventure. And somewhere along the lines in upstate New York, I was like, yeah, I guess I could go to the Olympics. That seems pretty cool. So yeah, here we are like 10 years later, and I got an Olympic title or Olympic participation underneath my belt.
That's incredible. And it's just the amount of motivation and investment that your parents put into you, right? Like propelling you and giving you all the opportunities and chances to try things out, 30 plus different sports that you tried. I think my parents only forced me to try soccer and football, right? And that was it, right? But I think like there's so much determination that it makes me wonder, as a kid, did you think that you would ever end up in the Olympic world someday in the future?
I always would watch the Olympics on TV, and I thought it was the coolest event that they ever put on TV. And me and my dad would huddle around and watch the gymnastics and watch the swimming and watch like the aerial event, which I actually thought was where I was going to end up, doing 3 backflips with like 4 no, doing an outrageous amount of flips and twists. But I never thought it was a reality or could be a reality because of kind of where I was and where I lived and the opportunities that I would miss out on almost. Because you don't really hear about skiers coming out of upstate New York. You hear about the next Michaela Schifrin coming out of Burke Academy, who has been in the program for years and years and years. And I was at that time a weekend skier. I would go up and ski from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and Saturday and Sunday, and that was it. Like my parents would drag me down to the hill, or take me to the hill and then try and drag me off the hill at the end of the day. And that was like a hobby at the time. I just never knew at that point in my career where it would ever take me. So no, I don't think I would ever say I was aware of the possibility of going to the Olympics. I just knew that it would be very cool if I could do it. But I'm very glad that I didn't think it was impossible.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's the important part,
Yeah.
that you didn't think it was impossible. You mentioned earlier, and it really caught my mind, after trying, so many different sports, you finally tried skiing, and you somehow knew that was like your soulmate sport, right? Tell me more about that. Like, how did you know that was the sport, and what was it like in the moment for you?
So I think I knew that skiing was my passion. I think I was in 2nd and 3rd grade, and this was pretty young, but I had done something on the way to school in the car, gotten in an argument with my dad, and he wanted me to behave or just stop yelling. And he said, fine, we're not going to skiing, or we're not going to practice this weekend. And I remember feeling crushed. Like I couldn't even get out of the car to go to school because the only thing I was thinking of is not skiing at that point. And my insides felt like they were pulled out of my stomach. And at that young age, I was just like, no. Like what do I need to do to be able to ski again? Like, what can I do in this moment to change that so that I will never, ever have skiing taken away? And I think that set me up for the rest of my life, because I have had moments like that with injuries and people telling me, no, you can't ski today because of obstacles, and just feeling that same feeling of, or having that same feeling of just helplessness. And that's probably why I have this crazy need to continue to pursue this passion of skiing despite these injuries and despite these challenges. And yeah, if it wasn't for that moment and in time, I don't think my dad would have realized how important the sport was to me, and I definitely wouldn't have known.
I mean, that speaks to me as a clear indication of passion, right? Where you just, it's in your blood, you have to do it. Otherwise, as you said, you feel helpless. And it makes me think a lot about, in the entrepreneurial world, a lot of startups, we get to meet hundreds, if not thousands of different founders and even investors who they lack that, twinkle in their eye, that passion that, right? It's there, that if you were to take them away from their startup or what they're doing in entrepreneurship, they would be miserable and helpless, right? But then you see with people who don't have that, and you know that they perhaps don't have what it takes because they don't actually care enough about the sport. That, you know, if it's taken away from them, they're done, right? And I think in your case specifically, you need that, especially if you want to reach, you know, Olympic level athletics, which is very, very impressive. So, you know, like, you found this real interest in commitment in professional skiing. I'm sure you had to make some very big life decisions in order to pursue your dreams. Tell me about, you know, what were some of the biggest fears and hesitations that you affronted?
Um, so I guess some of the biggest fears I've had in my career are kind of along the lines of failure. They resonate right in that realm of not being good enough. And I think it's a fear a lot of athletes have, especially in a performance and judging sport, where your success purely lies in someone else's hands at the end of the day. You can do as much as you want, but as soon as it comes down to that day of competition, it matters what that judge is sitting at the bottom of the course thinks. That's what the biggest fear, I guess, I have is not having that full control of everything in my sport. Because as someone who is very competitive and needs to find that next competitive edge above your competition, you feel that it's imperative that you do everything in your control to one up them and make sure you are doing your PT, make sure you're getting the best nutrition, make sure you're going above and beyond in your mental game and practices. And the biggest fear is that all of that effort that goes on won't be enough when it comes down to that biggest moment of your life. And one of my biggest fears actually came true when I was at the Olympics. I had done everything that I thought I needed to do, and I prepared so hard and I was so ready. But at the end of the day, I did everything in my power to compete and compete well, and it wasn't good enough. And my biggest fear at that point in time came true. And it probably took me a good 10 months to actually get over that moment of coming down from the biggest moment in my career of qualifying third in the Olympic Games and then going into the finals and not even making the next round. It took me a long time to get over that. But I am a strong believer that everything happens for a reason, and that those moments that really shake you and really turn your world upside down are actually the moments you learn and become a lot stronger because of.
No, I mean, it's so powerful to me to hear that, especially when the stakes are so high, right? For you in your case, like, the world's literally watching, right? Judges, the best of the best, are looking up to you, and you've been preparing relentlessly for this moment. And you know, there are internal and external factors, the things you can control and the things beyond your control. And the judges are a part of that, but also circumstances that impact your outcome. And it didn't work out, right? But I think your mindset and believing that things do happen for a reason is so powerful because it gives you hope, right? Because it doesn't mark the end of your journey, your endeavor. Because I imagine there are many people, perhaps athletes, right, in the Olympics, you might know better, but something like that happens, they just throw the towel and say, you know what, it's not meant to be, right? Maybe I wasn't good enough. And this is the confirmation of that. We see that a lot with entrepreneurship, right? Sometimes founders are going through the trials and tribulations, right, that you could expect in a startup journey. And oftentimes they give up without realizing that they're so close to achieving that dream, that success, right? As they say, it's always darkest before dawn, right? And they're so close to it, and they have to keep that hope of moving forward. But that fear of failure, that fear of failing again and again and again, deters them from taking more of the risk. So I find it admirable that you it took you some time to process that and pick yourself up. But I admire that you're still set on going at it again, going bigger. You mentioned earlier, and I remember when I was introducing you talking about, sort of the trade-offs that you've had to make in your life, and you're still pretty young. High school, college, what were some of the trade-offs that you had to take into consideration to pursue this dream?
So when I was in high school, I guess this was around when I was 15 years old, and I had just become one of the best Eastern skiers, and the next level at that point in time was to try and go compete against the Western skiers, and then the next step after that was the international level of competition. And I remember having a pretty serious conversation with my mom and dad, where they looked at me, and they, at that point in time, the biggest financial deal we had dealt with was like driving 8 hours to Maine and staying in a hotel up there. But this next step that was necessary for me to take in this skiing career was to start to travel and start to compete and start to ski more than just on a weekend. So they had a very huge decision for me to make, with their support, which was amazing. But they told me that it's either skiing or college. We've saved since you were a baby for you to go to school. But if you start to ski and travel internationally, we can't do both. We physically are not prepared to support you in both of those dreams. And at the time, I was probably way too young to make a decision like that, but I'm glad that I did. And I chose skiing, and I chose that level of, okay, well, I'm gonna make it then. Like, that is what I need to do, is I need to make the ski team, and I need to be successful when I'm there. And that mindset actually set me up for really great success, because I am a person who skis best when I have pressure, and I don't like to ski under pressure, I guess, but I find that my biggest strengths come out, and my biggest resilient characteristics are the strongest and the biggest effect when I'm under the most pressure. So I actually went on to compete later that season and make the U.S. ski team at 16. And then my first actual World Cup opportunity arose, and I won the international event, and that qualified me to become a part of the A team, which was fully funded. So I went from not knowing how to pay for college to being a fully funded athlete within 2 years, which for my parents was the biggest financial relief that they could have ever asked for. They didn't expect that. I didn't expect it, but it was one of those things that I think the circumstances and what we decided to do in that decision really set me up to have a successful path, despite the risk.
Wow, that's so incredible. And I think I actually, I don't know if you saw, but I had a sigh of relief, right? When you talked about that after 2 years you were fully funded, because I imagine like even your parents had that same sigh of relief, like, oh, like it worked out, right? And I think your story rings so familiar to me in that it resembles that junction which most entrepreneurs must face at some point in their journey as an entrepreneur, right? Where they have to decide to give up their job, or they have to, if they're students, they have to drop out of school, right? To focus on this idea, or sometimes saying, do I even take a job or find a job, or do I just put all my bets on launching this startup? I think it takes a lot of courage, right? A lot of courage and believe in oneself and abilities. And naturally, you're going to have a lot of the same feelings that you described earlier: fear of failure, self-doubt. But you have to overcome that. You have to accept the risks, and you have to commit. And I think that's something that you understand all too well, right? Otherwise, you would have just stepped back, gone to the status quo, and given up on your dream, which I think would have been very, very sad. We need more people like you in this world. So I'd love to know, how do you approach taking risks in life? I know you took this very big risk, but what is the mindset that you have?
That's a good question. My mindset, I would say, is my biggest strength and my biggest weakness in my ski career. I focus on the good, and I focus on what I know I can control and what I know I can do well. And that works really well in a situation where you're training and you're just constantly trying to get better. But it also takes a level of humbleness that you have to be able to retract and look at what you did really well, but still see not necessarily the flaws, but the room for improvement. And what I guess I get really caught up with is there's a level of what it takes to do well in a competition, and that can be achieved by anyone. But there's another level on top of that of what it takes to be great and win the competition, and that not a lot of people can do. That comes from your pure mental ability. We see it time and time again of athletes cracking under pressure or being so good outside of the competition, but when they're put under that pressure, why does it break them? And I think it comes from years and years and years of knowing who you are mentally and how you perform and what circumstances are going to make you grow to actually be able to implement that internal mental strength in those high pressure situations. So my mindset is actually really focused right now on improving mental strength. I have been out of competition, I think, for 2 years now. And I have to return to competition this fall at an Olympic trial, which is going to be a World Cup. And that will be my first comp back. So for me right now, my goals and my mindset is, what do I need to do to fine tune my mental strengths and ideas so that when I roll up to that competition, that I am so 110% that nothing can shake me. So my mindset is constantly reevaluating what I can do better, but also understanding that on my worst day, I'm still great. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it makes perfect sense, right? That you have to have this kind of mindset if you're in the Olympic world, but also for entrepreneurs, right? I've seen it firsthand so many times where you have somebody who has very clear talent and potential for whatever it is they're doing, building rockets, software, salsa, if you want. But there is this just deep inherent self-doubt, right? Where they somehow at the last minute, whether it's before they go to pitch investors in a boardroom or something, there's that little voice that's holding them back and they're terrified, right? It's like, maybe I don't have what it takes. Maybe I don't deserve to have a seat at the table. And I think a part of that is normal, right? I think I've heard many times from numerous people, talented people, that if you don't consider yourself an imposter, you probably aren't very good at what you do, right? And sometimes that self-doubt is a good sign, right? And I think it sounds like you've felt that, many athletes have felt that, but you still work through it. And I think it's super important. Going back to the previous point that you made about that risk between either going to college or not, also reminds me of entrepreneurs, right? Taking that risk, leaving their job or whatever to launch that startup, perhaps with no funding, right? Perhaps they don't have rich friends and family to back them. They have no cushion. They have to take that leap of faith, right? And 1 or 2 years later, they may be fully funded by investors who believe in that vision. But in order to get to that point where people see that commitment, that point where you are in the pressure cooker, right? Like you said, like you bring your A game, you're at your finest moment when you're under that pressure, is not achievable if you're not taking that kind of risk. And it's such a powerful story, and it's so powerful that you believe it, and that's something that you've been going through. A little bit more about the traditional obstacles and challenges that one might have. What are some of the more underspoken yet pressing issues that athletes face today?
So I have this feeling that our world and our society has this very specific idea of who athletes are and what they do with their lives. And even when you see an athlete on the television, it's almost like you know them, you know who they are because of what they've accomplished. And that's my biggest problem with being a high level athlete is you may know someone how through their competitions and through their medals and their achievements, but deep down inside, there is a little bit of construing that goes on to make these athletes look how great they are. Deep down inside, we are all just human, and we are just trying to claw our way to victory. But it takes so much more than that. And it takes what happens when you're not on screen. And it's kind of like you said, when entrepreneurs are just working their butt off to try and make ends meet, it's those moments that really are the hardest part, because no one's watching you. There's no camera on you. There's no sort of promotion going on where you can better yourself in the eyes of the public. But those are the most important parts when you're an athlete. It's doing what you need to do day in and day out, whether someone's watching you or not, whether someone's checking up on you or not, making sure that you are going to be the best prepared athlete among all of your competitors when the final show comes. And that's the part that you don't really get to know. You don't really get to see an athlete do. So I think that plays a huge role in how athletes kind of get construed over social media, on media platforms, all that fun stuff. And the other part is you don't really get to see them struggle. You don't really get to see them on the verge of drowning in what they're doing, but coming back to a victorious state of mind. And that is one of the parts that I'm pretty passionate about, because in the athletic world, you're almost programmed to be a very cold-hearted individual that is strong no matter what. You don't show your vulnerability. You don't talk about it. But you continue on and you push through, and likely that moment of vulnerability will pass and you won't have to deal with it anymore, because you'll win something and you won't even remember that happened. But when you're in a moment where you don't have something going on that's going to make you forget about that really low point or your vulnerability, that starts to grow. And so I've experienced this personally in my own mental health. When you're not constantly competing or traveling or trying to one up everyone else in the world, there's this moment where all the dirt and everything surrounding you just settles, and you're forced to look at it, and you're forced to really come to terms with what is going on in your life and with everything around you too. So my injuries have been the biggest eye-opening moment where everything settles to the ground and I'm forced to come to terms with whatever's going on. And for me, that's been really mental. It's been a lot of focusing on what is my brain doing when it's not being constantly stimulated. And that's probably one of the other biggest weaknesses that athletes aren't allowed to show. But in reality, they're not weaknesses at all. If you can overcome some mental health issues and challenges, you're probably going to be stronger than any other athlete you're standing next to. But it's one of those things you're not really encouraged to talk about, you're not really encouraged to share, because again, the end product, the person standing on top of the podium, that's who people want to see. And that's that's not the reality.
That's incredibly fascinating that you mentioned that, because that is the reality, right? We're so used to seeing the final cut of the athletes, their achievements, etc. But it's almost like everybody forgets or doesn't even realize that these overnight successes are like 10 years, 20 years in the making, right? And there's a long journey dotted with failures and challenges, internal turmoil to get to that point of a few minutes of just like success. You mentioned mental health, and I think that's such an important topic for me, right? I firmly believe that it's super important that we talk about it as a community, as a society, and as a species, right? But I know that you're also very passionate about mental health, about this topic as an athlete. And like you said, it's something that's very almost taboo, right? In your world, they don't talk about it. It's rather, let's just talk about something else, right? Tell us why it matters so much to you in the context of athletics, namely Olympic athletes. Why do you care so much about mental health, and how does this tie into your personal experience?
So at first, when mental health really came face to face with me and I couldn't get past it, I couldn't go around it, I really had to deal with it. I realized that talking about it and really just opening up about the truth in what I was dealing with was actually really helping me. And it began with sharing those weaknesses with my sports psych, which at first I thought a sports psych was only supposed to help you compete. But I quickly realized through injuries that there's an opportunity to actually build your basis of mental strength and your mental health no matter what. And that'll actually help you be a better athlete. So once I had that idea that it wasn't something you just wash over and never think about again, that it would actually make me a better athlete, that perspective changed everything. Mm-hmm. And I realized if I had had that perspective when I was 16, 17, and I was going through my first injury and starting to build these coping mechanisms and these habits of what I did when I dealt with stress or trauma, I know if I knew that earlier, I would be so much better equipped at age 23 than I was in those prior years. Because to be honest, I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I didn't even know you could talk about feeling sad. I didn't know that there was this even possibility that an athlete could feel something like depression. And if I had just known that that was somewhat of a normal thing, and maybe that if I didn't have this idea of, oh, since none of my role models are depressed, how could I be depressed at that time? Maybe I wouldn't be so late to the game of building a strong basis of mental health. Because in reality, if you're stable and if you're strong outside of your sport, there's no telling what you're going to do in your sport. So that's why I feel very passionate about talking about it. And I've also realized that in the last 6 to 10 months of starting to be open about what I'm dealing with and what I'm going through, I've met so many athletes who are going through the exact same thing. And skiers, snowboarders, skaters, like, you don't realize how connected everyone is until you have these moments of vulnerability and uncomfortableness. And then you realize that, oh, it's not just me. Like, there's actually, there could be a reason why this happens, especially in the sports world. So the more we can talk about it, maybe the more we can figure it out as a community and, stop the problem before it gets too big.
Yeah, no, and we often already know what are some of the consequences of, leaving mental health on the sideline, right? Especially when it's full-fledged depression, right? People hurt themselves. I've had friends that I've lost to to mental health issues and stuff like that. And I think that's why it's so important. But I find it fascinating that this is such a real thing within the world of professional athletics, right? Again, the sort of impression that the masses get of Olympic athletes is that they're perfect, right? There's just, accomplishing so much and reaching the zenith of athletic ability, but there's ostensibly nothing else going on there. They couldn't be happier. And I think it's such a contorted viewpoint of reality. And I think it's important that we talk about these issues. And I'm proud that you are driving this forward, because I think, so many athletes that feel they have to keep delivering at this level. And if they don't put those feelings aside, they might lose their edge, if you will. Talk a little bit more about sort of the impact of the injuries, because I know like the injuries have played a very big part in who you've become, and it's made you a very, very strong athlete.
Yeah, I have a extensive list of injuries that have riddled my career with challenges, I guess. I blew my first ACL when I was 17 years old, 2 weeks after winning my first World Cup. So right then and there, I experienced the biggest high of my career to the biggest low of my life. And that drastic change, I was not prepared for. I was not ready for. I was able to rehab back after, I want to say 22 months. I returned to competition and I returned to a podium. So I did something right in those months of recovery where I was ready to come back and prepared to compete at a high level again. That span, I was actually able to make the Olympics after that first ACL tear. I came back to just really high level results and high level skiing. And I went to the Olympics. It was great. I had so much fun. I didn't do nearly as well as I thought I was going to, but I had the time of my life and I was on another high. And the next week I went to the first World Cup after that start and blew my knee again. And I knew it skiing down the course. I felt the pop. At that point in time, it didn't even hurt. I was just like that was it. That was pretty tough, but I knew I could come back because I had done it before. And I was thinking, oh, I'm an expert now. I can do this. It'll be great. And my initial reaction to stress or trauma is put your head down and keep going and push through. So I took that mentality into that second tear recovery and was able to come back super strong. I broke all of my records of strength and was cleared to compete at around, I want to say 10 months post surgery. Somewhere along the lines of coming back to that first competition after my second ACL tear, I didn't have an ACL again. I competed in Lake Placid, New York, and I got fifth that day at the World Cup. It was great, but by the end of that competition, I didn't know I blew my knee. I just didn't have an ACL at the end of that day, and I don't know if it was from the competition or training before it. I just knew that something felt off. And despite being so excited about coming back to my first World Cup after my second ACL, like no one does that in mogul skiing. No one ever comes back from two. Like who would ever do that? And I remember just being so heartbroken because my family had all come out to go watch this competition. And I almost felt embarrassed because I got the news over a phone call. I was actually at a dinner with Johnny Mosley and my family and a bunch of other Rochester people. And I had to keep this secret because we were at a celebratory dinner for me and other athletes that had done well out of the New York area. And I went to the bathroom, I took the call, got the news that I didn't have an ACL, and I returned to dinner and didn't tell a single soul for the next 24 hours because I couldn't bring myself to let everyone down. And that is probably the moment where I knew something was up, and I knew that this next recovery was going to be tough. So since then, I had to have a 2-part surgery. The first part was to fill my bone holes that were previously drilled into for the other ACLs, let that heal, and that took about 8 months, and then get my second ACL surgery and reconstruction. And beginning of that, I didn't think I was going to do it. I was a coper at that point. I didn't even need an ACL to keep going with the rest of my life. But if I wanted to continue competitive mogul skiing, I needed an ACL, and I needed to have that surgery and go through a 2-year recovery process. And I remember thinking at the beginning of that with my surgeon, being one, asking him if this is even possible, if this is even remotely possible to come back from 3 ACLs, all on the same knee, let alone. And he looked at me and he said, I'm going to make this work. And I remember just like, that didn't really give me a whole lot of hope and like comfort, but he told me he was going to make it work. So my job at that point was to also make it work and do whatever I took to get back to that, sport. So I'm here, what is it, February, or no, it's March now. I am a year and 3 months out of that ACL surgery. And I'm on the way to compete again. I'm coming back from that. Still today, I'm taking this entire year of this winter to train and focus on the things I need to do to be prepared, because when I do compete again, it will be that Olympic qualifier, and it will set the tone of whether I have a shot of going to the Olympics again. So those injuries have really, I would say, set my career back a little bit. But in that time of recovery and pain and really uncertainty, I have been able to learn more about myself, learn that I've actually become stronger because of any of this. And I don't think I would have the success and the ability to compete at such a high level if I didn't have all of these challenges that I've had to overcome. And at the end of the day, if you asked me if I could do anything over again, I would say no. I would do all of this over again, and I would give anything to just ski for 30 seconds. You know, like that's what it comes down to. And that's why I still do it.
Wow. I love this. It's such a powerful message, such a powerful story. And I almost feel and imagine like so many people in your position under those circumstances probably would have given up, you know, and said, you know what, it's not worth it. Like it's too much of a stretch at this point. But you didn't go down that path. You said, I'm going to do what it takes, right? Because you wanted it. And you've taken the steps, right? Over 3 years of recovery and preparing, and this has made you undeniably stronger than ever, right? And I think it's such a valuable lesson for entrepreneurs, just leaders anywhere, right? You're gonna have setbacks. You're gonna break your leg, proverbially speaking. You're gonna get those punches. You got to roll with them. And I think going back to what you said at the very beginning, because things do happen for a reason, right? I like to believe that we're all in life working up to some big moment in our life, right? We have many big moments, but there's like that one big spotlight moment that's for the history books, right? It's the thing that you will be remembered for. And all of the setbacks and challenges and obstacles that we encounter, the adversity, they inevitably are preparing you for that moment, whatever it may be, right? And you have to believe. And I think that's what ultimately sets apart the people who achieve that and those who don't. And I believe you're probably on the way to it because you have what it takes, clearly, from the way you think about it. You mentioned a few minutes back the importance about talking about your vulnerabilities. And I find that very fascinating, especially for an elite athlete like yourself. What is the value of being vulnerable, especially in, the context of driving the conversation of motivation and also mental health?
Vulnerabilities are one of those topics that I'm still fairly uncomfortable with, and it's new to talk about something you were maybe a little ashamed of. But I've realized that nothing comes from being comfortable. There's nothing worth achieving that comes with this constant sense of comfortableness. Your achievement comes when you are pushed to those edges and you are pushed to your limits and even past your limits. And you are forced to understand where your new limits lie and what you're actually capable of when you're not comfortable. And it's an important lesson, because I think you will never you'll never see that achievement and that big moment come around unless you're willing to do that, unless you're willing to take that feeling and be okay with it. And I'm still learning how to do this, and I'm constantly trying to get to that level of being okay with being afraid and being okay with being nervous and afraid to tell someone that hey, like, I'm not always happy. Like, that was a big one for me. Being able to like talk to my friends about something that I was thinking about daily, and I realized not talking about it is probably worse, and it's probably more uncomfortable than just having that conversation and laying it all out on the table. Because what I've realized too is the things you think you're uncomfortable with, the things you think over and over again in your head, they're not necessarily that bad once you are able to verbalize it and have another perspective even lean in on it. So I think uncomfortableness is very important and essential for human growth in general. So if you can come to terms with that being a norm in your life and in your struggle, and understand that the lessons you learn because of that will probably be greater than anything you could do by just staying in your comfort zone.
What is the ultimate impact that you want to make in this world?
It's a big question. I was trying to figure out my place in this world for the last, I guess, 23 years at this point. And I've realized that I'm really nothing without the people around me and those who support me in what I do. And I've also realized that what I do in my life, it's actually pretty selfish of what I do. I ski for myself. I ski to compete. And in that sense, it's very selfish in what I do. But I've actually learned that the things that surround that passion of competing are not selfish. And the reason why I am the way I am are because of those moments that are parallel with what I do. So what I want to leave in this world is a structure of friendships and creating a difference in people's lives that are surrounding this very intentional, selfish goal. Because I know that I can't change who I am, and I know that who I am as an athlete is probably who I will be for the rest of my life. But there are very positive and very serious gains to be made in parallel to competition. And I think that starts with talking about mental health. And I think that starts with talking about serious changes that need to be made and having these real conversations. So when it comes down to it, what I want to leave behind is a positive legacy, a positive, something where someone can look and use my path and my challenges and everything that I've done for something that's greater than who I am. And I know that I'm going through all of these challenges, all of these adversity for a reason. And I have to believe that it's because it's so someone else doesn't, or so someone else who is can learn from what I have gone through. And I guess that's the thing that I hope to leave an impact with. And I hope that my story, as sad and underwhelming as it can be, I hope it is for the best. And I hope that it gives comfort and guidance to others.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you mentioned that what you do, you feel like it can be very selfish, but I think that goal is very selfless, and I think it's such a good ultimate outcome that you want to make the world a better place, impact people's lives, inspire them, right, with your journey. And I think that's super important. The last question before we wrap up here, Morgan, given that there are some parallels and similarities between achieving life-altering milestones, such as becoming an Olympic athlete and launching a high-potential startup, what actionable advice would you give to entrepreneurs who want to change the world forever?
The first part is, if you think you've hit a barrier, it's not a barrier, it's a lesson. It's an opportunity to grow. And you just got to keep going. And I think that statement, if you're going through hell, keep going, I think that plays a huge part in the idea of someone in an entrepreneurial situation trying to achieve their dreams. In my area of expertise of sports, the best thing I can do is work my ass off and give everything I have to this overall passion and let no one take that away from me. So the best parallel into the business world is do your thing. Don't let anyone try and talk you down from it. Because deep down inside, I think everyone knows what their passion is and they have this gut feeling for a reason. So I'd say listen to that gut feeling and don't stop at anything, whether it's an ACL injury or if it's a bad meeting. Like, don't let anything tear you down, because I know that the gold at the end of the path is worth every moment of misery along the way. So keep going.
Wow. I love that so much. And I feel like I'm going to be rewatching this talk long into the future because it's so inspirational. And I think there's something so authentic and unique to who you are, Morgan. So thank you so much for, again, taking time out of your super busy schedule to join us here, impart some wisdom to the investor and entrepreneurial community. And we wish you best. And we hope to see you in the Olympics soon enough, achieving those big goals. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. This is so much fun.